Marcus pulled a thick envelope from his coat and set it on the small kitchen table between them. "There's $20,000 in here," he said. "Take it." The woman across from him, a young mother who 3 weeks earlier had been standing in the rain with nowhere left to go, looked down at the envelope for a long moment. Then she pushed it back across the table toward him. "No." Marcus Bennett had closed billion-dollar acquisitions without blinking. He had sat across negotiating tables from men who wanted to take his company apart piece by piece, and he had never once flinched. But no one, in 18 years, had ever refused his money before. He had no idea that this woman was about to change his life more than any deal he'd ever signed. 3 weeks earlier. Before tonight's story begins, I want to hear from you. Type the name of your city in the comments below. There's something powerful about knowing people from every corner of the world are sitting here together, listening to the same story at the same time. Thank you for being here. Now, let's begin. Rain had been falling over the financial district since noon. The kind of cold November rain that doesn't announce itself with thunder. It just settles in and stays. Marcus Bennett sat in the back of his car, watching the wipers cut the same arc over and over across the windshield, and thought about nothing in particular, which was rare for him. Thinking about nothing was a luxury he didn't often allow himself. Bennett Freight Holdings occupied 11 floors of glass and steel, 2 blocks from where his car now idled in traffic, and Marcus had built most of those 11 floors himself, brick by brick, contract by contract, in the 18 years since he'd taken a failing regional trucking company and turned it into the 3rd largest logistics operation in the Midwest. People who worked for him used words like relentless and exacting. People who worked against him used harsher ones. Marcus had stopped keeping track of which was which a long time ago. His phone buzzed against his knee. An email from Preston Cole, vice chairman of the board. Subject line, Q4 projections. "We need to talk before Friday." Marcus didn't open it. He knew what talking to Preston meant. It meant sitting across a conference table while a man who owned 11% of the company tried to make 11% sound like 51. Walter, his driver of 9 years, eased the car through a red light that had just turned, then slowed as the street narrowed near the transit overpass. Traffic was thick here most evenings, buses and commuters funneling toward the train station, everyone moving fast to get out of the rain. That was when Marcus saw her. A young woman stood beneath the overpass, pressed as close to the concrete as she could get without touching it. A baby wrapped in a thin blue blanket against her chest. She wasn't panhandling. She wasn't holding a sign. She was simply standing there, swaying slightly, the way people sway when they are trying to keep something alive with the warmth of their own body, because they have nothing else to offer it. Water ran off the edge of the overpass in a steady curtain a foot from where she stood, and every few seconds the wind pushed it sideways, and she flinched and turned her shoulder to shield the baby without seeming to think about it at all. Marcus had passed 100 people like her in his life. He knew that about himself, and he wasn't proud of it. The city had a way of turning suffering into scenery if you let it, into something you glanced at, and then filed away before the light changed. He didn't know why this time was different. Maybe it was the way she kept checking the baby's face every few seconds, tilting the blanket back just enough to see, then pulling it closed again, an anxious little ritual repeated over and over. Maybe it was simply that the car had slowed enough for him to really look. "Walter," Marcus said. "Pull over." Walter glanced in the mirror, surprised, then did it without a word, easing the car to the curb 30 feet past the overpass. Marcus sat for a moment with his hand on the door, aware in some distant part of himself that he was about to do something that didn't fit anywhere in his calendar, his strategy, or his week. He got out into the rain without an umbrella. The woman saw him coming and her whole posture changed, shoulders squaring, chin lifting, the universal stance of someone bracing for a stranger who might be dangerous, or worse, might be kind, in a way that would cost her something later. Marcus stopped a few feet away, hands visible, rain running down the back of his collar. "I'm not going to bother you," he said. "I just want to make sure the baby's warm enough. That's all." "We're fine," she said, too fast, the words worn smooth from repetition. "Okay." He didn't move closer. "How old?" She hesitated, some calculation running behind her eyes, weighing whether answering was a door she wanted to open. 6 months, she finally said. "His name's Eli." "I'm Marcus." He didn't offer his hand. Something about her posture told him a handshake would feel like an intrusion. "There's a coffee shop on the corner. It's warm and it's dry. I'll buy you both something hot. And if you want me to leave the second we're inside, I will. No conditions." "I've heard that before," she said. "The no conditions part. I imagine you have." Marcus didn't try to argue her out of the suspicion. It seemed, in that moment, like the most honest thing he could say. "You don't have to trust me. You just have to get him out of the rain." She looked down at Eli, whose small face had gone red from the cold, and something in her seemed to give way. Not trust exactly, but a kind of exhausted surrender to necessity. "Maya," she said. "My name's Maya." The coffee shop on the corner smelled like burnt espresso and wet umbrellas, and the barista glanced up when they walked in, took one look at Maya's soaked coat and the baby, and didn't say a word about the fact that neither of them looked like they belonged in a $5 latte kind of place. Marcus appreciated that more than he expected to. They sat at a table near the back, away from the window, and Marcus ordered without asking what she wanted, because he suspected she'd choose the cheapest thing on the menu out of habit rather than hunger. He ordered soup, bread, hot chocolate, and a plain black coffee for himself. And when it arrived, Maya ate like someone who had learned not to trust that a meal would be followed by another one. "You don't have to explain anything to me," Marcus said, when the silence had stretched long enough that it seemed to need filling. "But if there's somewhere I can help you get to tonight, I'd like to help." "Why?" Maya asked, not hostile, just genuinely searching his face for the catch. Marcus considered the question longer than it probably deserved. "Because I've spent a long time telling myself I didn't have room in my life to notice people," he said finally. "And tonight, for some reason, I noticed." Maya studied him the way a person studies a locked door, checking for a way it might swing open on them later. "I had an apartment until 3 weeks ago," she said eventually, quiet enough that he had to lean in slightly to hear her over the espresso machine. "Eli's father left when I was 7 months pregnant. I was working the front desk at a medical clinic, going to night classes for my nursing degree. Then Eli came early, and I missed too many shifts taking care of him, and they let me go. Then I couldn't make rent. It happens faster than people think it does. One missed payment turns into an eviction notice, turns into a shelter, with a 6-week waiting list, turns into a bus stop." "Where were you planning to go tonight?" "Shh, there's a 24-hour laundromat 2 blocks from here," she said, and the flatness in her voice told him this wasn't the first time she'd said it out loud. "They don't kick you out if you buy something from the vending machine every couple hours. It's warmer than outside." Marcus felt something tighten in his chest that he didn't have a name for. He thought about his own apartment, the top 2 floors of a building he owned outright, 4 bedrooms he never used, and he thought about how strange it was that a person could have that much space and still somehow feel like he had nothing to offer anyone. "I own a small building near the river," he said carefully. "Part of it's unused, a caretaker's unit on the ground floor. It's not glamorous, but it's warm, it's got a working kitchen, and it's yours for as long as you need it. No rent, no conditions. Maya's jaw tightened, and Marcus watched her run the same calculation. He suspected she'd been running for weeks now. The exhausting arithmetic of what a night indoors was worth against what it might cost her later from a stranger she had no reason to trust. "I want to be clear about something," she said, her voice steady despite the exhaustion underneath it. "I'm not going to be anyone's charity story. I'm not going to smile for a photo. And I'm not going to thank you in front of your friends at some dinner party. If I take this, it's because my son needs to be warm tonight. That's the only reason." "Understood," Marcus said. "I wasn't planning on photos." She held his gaze a moment longer, then looked down at Eli, whose eyes had finally started to drift closed against the warmth of the coffee shop. "One night," she said. "We'll see about anything after that." The caretaker's unit turned out to be small but solid, a converted ground floor space with exposed brick and a kitchenette that hadn't been used in years. But the radiator worked, and the bed was made, because Marcus had called ahead from the car and asked his building superintendent, a quiet, unflappable man named Otis, to have it ready without asking why. Otis met them at the door with towels and a portable crib pulled from storage, and didn't ask a single unnecessary question, which Marcus was grateful for. Maya stood in the doorway a long moment before stepping inside, the same way, Marcus would later learn. She stood in every unfamiliar room, cataloging exits before she allowed herself to relax. "There's food in the refrigerator," Marcus said. "Otis stocked it an hour ago. My number's on the counter if you need anything. I won't come by unless you call." "Why does this feel too easy?" Maya asked, not quite trusting the quiet of the room. "It's not easy," Marcus said. "I just decided to stop pretending I'm too busy to help. That's different from easy." She almost smiled at that, the ghost of one, gone before it fully arrived. Marcus left without lingering because some instinct told him that staying too long, watching too closely, would undo whatever fragile trust the night had built. 3 days turned into a week. A week turned into 3. Maya didn't ask Marcus for anything beyond that first night, and Marcus, true to his word, didn't push. He learned things about her in small pieces, the way you learn a language by living inside it rather than studying it. That she took Eli to the free clinic every Tuesday for his checkups, walking the whole way rather than spending money on the bus. That she read secondhand nursing textbooks late into the night at the small kitchen table, highlighting passages with a pen that was clearly running out of ink. That she never once asked him for money, not even when he offered. He tried, more than once. He offered to cover her nursing school tuition outright. He offered to set her up with a car, an apartment closer to the hospital, a stipend while she studied. Every time, Maya refused, and every time, her refusal carried the same quiet, unshakable weight. It came to a head on an ordinary Thursday evening, 3 weeks after that first night in the coffee shop. Marcus arrived at the caretaker's unit with a thick envelope tucked inside his coat, having decided, after turning it over in his mind all day, that this was the one gesture Maya couldn't reasonably refuse. Not a loan, not a monthly stipend, just enough in a single lump sum to cover a full semester of tuition and textbooks and let her breathe for a while. He set it on the small kitchen table between them. "There's $20,000 in here," he said. "Take it." Maya looked down at the envelope for a long moment, Eli asleep against her shoulder, and Marcus watched something harden behind her eyes that hadn't been there a moment before. Then she pushed it back across the table toward him. "No." "Maya, I need you to understand something," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor Marcus could see working through her hands. "When I was in high school, a family from our church sponsored my mother and me for a year, paid our electric bill, bought me a coat for winter. It felt like a miracle, until it turned out the coat came with expectations. We had to sit in the front pew every Sunday. My mother had to stand up and thank them by name in front of the whole congregation every single week, like a performance. When we finally couldn't keep doing it, they stopped paying the bill and my mother cried for a week. Not because we lost the money, but because she realized the kindness had never really been about us. Marcus sat with that for a long moment, the envelope still resting on the table between them. "So you learned that free things aren't free," he said. "I learned that money from someone with power over you is never really free," Maya said. "It always comes back around eventually, one way or another. So no, I won't take your $20,000, but I will take a ride to my Tuesday clinic shift if it's raining, because that's just a favor, not a debt." Marcus put the envelope away and didn't bring it out again. He started, instead, offering things that couldn't be measured in dollar signs, driving her to clinic shifts when the weather turned, mentioning her sharp instincts to Otis's wife, a retired ICU nurse who began stopping by on Sundays to quiz Maya on pharmacology terms over coffee. Small things, things that couldn't be mistaken for ownership. It was on one of those Sunday afternoons, in fact, that Marcus first saw what Maya was capable of. Otis had been up on a ladder repairing a light fixture in the hallway when he lost his footing and came down hard, striking his head against the corner of a radiator on his way. Marcus, arriving at the building minutes later for an unrelated visit, found chaos. Otis's wife panicking, Otis himself groggy and bleeding from a gash above his eyebrow, and Maya already on her knees beside him. Eli sat down safely in his portable crib a few feet away, her hands moving with a calm, practiced precision Marcus had never seen in her before. "Don't move him," she said, without looking up, her voice suddenly clipped and certain in a way it never was in ordinary conversation. "Someone call for an ambulance. He's got a laceration above the brow. Possible concussion. I need a clean towel, not a paper one. An actual towel, now." Marcus watched her work, applying pressure to the wound, checking Otis's pupils with the flashlight function on her phone, asking him steady, simple questions to gauge his orientation, and understood, watching her, that whatever else Maya had lost in the last few months, she had not lost this. This was hers. Nobody had given it to her, and nobody could take it away. The ambulance arrived 12 minutes later. The paramedic who examined Otis in the hallway glanced at Maya's initial assessment, scrawled quickly on the back of an envelope she'd grabbed from the counter, and nodded with something like respect. "Whoever did this triage did it right," he said. "Probably saved him a rougher trip to the ER." Maya didn't take the compliment easily. She simply nodded, gathered Eli back into her arms, and went quiet for the rest of the evening, the way people go quiet after adrenaline drains out of them all at once. Marcus didn't say much about it that night, but something in him had shifted, watching her, and he found himself, later that week, making a call he hadn't planned on making, to the dean of admissions at the university's nursing program, not to buy Maya a place, but to ask what an accelerated licensing pathway might look like for someone with her clinical instincts and no financial safety net. The dean mentioned a hospital-sponsored scholarship program, merit-based. No strings attached beyond an agreement to work at the sponsoring hospital for 2 years after graduation. Marcus wrote down the details and said nothing to Maya. Not yet. Uncertain whether even mentioning it would feel, to her, like one more envelope in disguise. He was still deciding how to bring it up when the story broke. Preston Cole had never liked Marcus. Not really. Not since the day 11 years earlier when Marcus had voted down Preston's plan to spin off the company's most profitable division and sell it to a competitor for a quick, enormous payout. Preston had been biding his time ever since, waiting for a lever long enough to move Marcus out of the chairman's seat, And when a junior associate at the firm mentioned, almost in passing, that Marcus Bennett had been quietly housing a homeless woman in one of his rental properties for weeks, Preston recognized his lever immediately. He didn't need to fabricate anything. He only needed to make the truth sound like something else. By the time reporter Rachel Simmons called Marcus's office, requesting comment on reports of an unusual living arrangement at one of Bennett Freight Holdings' subsidiary properties, the story had already begun circulating among the city's business press in whispered, half-formed versions. Bennett housing a mystery woman. Question of a hidden relationship. Question of misused company assets, since the building, though privately owned by Marcus, had once been listed under a corporate holdings entity years earlier. Marcus learned about the calls the same afternoon Maya learned about them too, from Otis's wife, who'd fielded a reporter's question at the building's front door before realizing what was happening and shutting it firmly. Maya arrived at Marcus's office that evening, still in her coat, Eli on her hip, her face carrying an expression Marcus hadn't seen on her since that first night under the overpass. "You knew this could happen," she said, not quite an accusation, but close to one. "A man like you, in a building with your name attached to it, and you didn't think anyone would notice a homeless woman moving in?" "I didn't think it through the way I should have," Marcus admitted. "I wasn't trying to protect myself from anything. I wasn't thinking about myself at all, honestly." "That's the problem," Maya said, and her voice cracked slightly, the first real crack he'd heard in it since he'd met her. "You get to not think about it. You get to be careless because whatever happens to you, you land on your feet. If this turns into a headline, I don't just lose privacy. I lose my scholarship interview next month. I lose the trust of a hospital that's about to decide whether to give a homeless woman with a GED and half a nursing degree a chance. Nobody's going to read past the word homeless once it's in print." Marcus felt the full weight of what she was saying settle into him. He had spent 18 years building a company on the principle that he could control outcomes if he simply worked hard enough, planned carefully enough, stayed ahead of every variable. It hadn't occurred to him, not fully, that the same instinct which made him a formidable businessman could also make him careless with someone who had far less room for error than he did. "Tell me what you need," he said. "Not what I think you need. What you actually need." Maya was quiet for a long moment. "I need this to not become a story about you," she said finally. "If it becomes a story about a rich man's kindness, I disappear into a footnote, a prop in somebody else's redemption narrative. I need people to understand I've been building this on my own, that you gave me a room, not a life." Marcus nodded slowly. "Then let's make sure that's what they understand." The board fundraiser had been scheduled for months, a black-tie evening at the Wellington Hotel meant to celebrate the company's charitable foundation. And Preston Cole had made sure, through channels Marcus wouldn't fully understand until later, that Rachel Simmons received an invitation as press. Marcus almost didn't attend at all. In the end, he decided that hiding from the moment would only make it look more like something to hide, and so he arrived alone, without Maya, deliberately keeping the two threads of his life separate that night, out of respect for the boundary she'd asked him to protect. It didn't matter. Maya came anyway, though not because Marcus invited her. She arrived at the hotel's side entrance an hour into the event, not for the party, but because Otis's wife had asked her to drop off a folder of paperwork for a fundraising raffle the building association was running, a small errand that had nothing to do with Marcus at all. Rachel Simmons, working the room with a photographer at her side, recognized her immediately from the whispered description a junior associate had given her weeks earlier, and closed the distance before Maya even reached the door. "You're the woman living in Mr. Bennett's building," Rachel said, not quite a question. "Can I ask you a few things about your arrangement?" Maya's whole body went rigid. the old defensive posture snapping back into place instantly. But she didn't run. She'd spent weeks preparing, without quite admitting to herself that she was preparing, for exactly this moment. "I'm not going to be a headline in someone else's story," Maya said, her voice steady even as her hands trembled slightly at her sides. "But I'll tell you the truth, if that's actually what you want." Rachel, notebook already open, gestured for her to continue. "3 months ago, I was standing under an overpass in the rain with my 6-month-old son, trying to keep him warm with my own body because I had nothing else to offer him," Maya said. "A man stopped his car and asked if we needed help. I said no, out of habit, because saying yes to a stranger has never once gone well for me in my life. He didn't push. He bought us soup. He offered a room with no conditions. And when I told him I'd walk out the second there were strings attached, he agreed. And he kept that promise every single day since." By now, a few guests near the entrance had noticed the exchange and begun to slow, drawn by the particular gravity of a conversation that clearly wasn't small talk. "I've applied for a nursing scholarship on my own," Maya continued. "I sat with a man last month while our building superintendent bled from a head wound, and I stabilized him before the ambulance arrived. Because I know how to do that. Because I earned that skill long before I ever met Marcus Bennett. If you want to write a story tonight, write that one. Write that a woman survived homelessness with her son and kept studying anyway. Don't write that a rich man rescued a helpless woman, because that's not what happened. And it does a disservice to every person out there doing exactly what I did without anyone's spare bedroom to help them do it." The room had gone quieter than Marcus realized until he stepped through the crowd and found himself standing beside her. "Everything she said is true," Marcus said simply, and he didn't raise his voice because he didn't need to. "I offered a room. She built everything else herself. If there's a story here worth telling, it's hers, not mine." Rachel Simmons closed her notebook slowly, some of the hunger gone out of her expression, replaced by something closer to genuine curiosity. "Off the record," she said. "That's a better story than the one I came here to write." Preston Cole, watching from near the bar, understood in that moment that whatever leverage he'd hoped to manufacture had just evaporated in front of 200 witnesses. He said nothing, simply set down his glass and turned toward the exit before the evening's photographs could catch his expression too clearly. Marcus resigned as chairman the following week, not because the board demanded it, but because he'd realized, standing in that ballroom, that as long as his name and his company's name remained tangled together in the public eye, people like Preston would always have a lever to pull, and people like Maya would always be at risk of becoming collateral damage in somebody else's business dispute. He kept a seat on the board. He handed daily operations to a chief operating officer he trusted. He stopped, for the first time in 18 years, measuring his worth by the size of the empire attached to his name. Maya's scholarship interview went forward 2 weeks later, without a single reporter aware it was happening, exactly as she'd wanted. She was accepted into the accelerated program that spring, on the strength of her own transcripts, her own recommendation letters from clinic supervisors who had watched her work long before Marcus Bennett ever existed in her life, and a written account of the afternoon she'd stabilized a head injury with nothing but a bath towel and steady hands. She moved into a small apartment near the hospital that summer, signed the lease under her own name, and though Marcus offered, gently, to help with the deposit, she declined that too, having saved what she needed from a part-time billing job she'd taken on at the same clinic where she once sat in the waiting room, with nowhere else to go. The caretaker's unit stood empty again after that, though Otis never rented it out. He said, when Marcus asked, that some rooms deserved to sit quiet for a while after doing the kind of work that one had done. A year later, on a Thanksgiving afternoon that had turned unusually sunny and mild, Marcus found himself at Maya's small apartment near the hospital, invited not as a benefactor, but as a guest. one of several people gathered around a table too small for the number of chairs pulled up to it. Eli, 18 months old now and sturdy on his feet, toddled between the guests, more interested in the dog belonging to Maya's downstairs neighbor than in the turkey cooling on the counter. Maya, in blue scrubs from a shift she'd worked that morning, still hadn't changed by the time Marcus arrived, and she waved him in with a dish towel still in her hand. "Second year of the program starts in January," she told him, setting a chair for him at the table without being asked. "Full course load. I might actually sleep sometime around graduation." "You'll manage," Marcus said. "You've managed harder things." Maya glanced toward the window, where late afternoon light was catching the edge of a photograph pinned to the refrigerator, taken the night of the fundraiser by a photographer who had, in the end, printed only one image from that evening. Not of scandal, but of a woman standing steady in a hotel ballroom, chin lifted, refusing to be anyone's story but her own. Maya had asked for a copy, and she kept it where she'd see it every morning making coffee, not as a wound to revisit, but as proof of the night she stopped being afraid of her own voice. "I never did take that money you tried to give me," she said, not looking away from the photograph. "Not $1 of it the whole time." "I noticed," Marcus said. "Good," Maya said, and there was warmth in it now, not defiance. "Because I needed to know I could build this myself. You gave me a room out of the rain. Everything else in this apartment I earned." Outside, the afternoon light kept sliding lower over the rooftops, and somewhere down the hall a radio was playing something soft and unhurried, and Eli laughed at something only he found funny. And for the first time in longer than either of them could easily name, neither Marcus nor Maya felt the need to fill the silence with anything at all. And that's where we leave Marcus, Maya, and little Eli. Not a rescue, not charity with a receipt attached. Just a room offered without conditions, and a woman who built everything else herself. What part of tonight's story stayed with you the longest? Was it Maya refusing the envelope? The night she saved Otis without anyone's help? Tell us in the comments below. We read every single one. If this story reminded you that real kindness never comes with a price tag, hit like, share it with someone who needs a little hope tonight, and subscribe so you never miss the next one. Thank you for spending this time with us. Until next time, take care of each other.